In this video, I have a really good chat with psychedelic researcher Dick Kahn, who's author of the DMT and My Occult Mind series of books. And we discuss everything from what's happening in a psychedelic experience, through to being a psychonaut parent, through to theories about reality. We talk about aliens, Aleister Crowley, it's the whole hog. Now, I know I say this every time, but this was a superb conversation, easily one of my favourites, and I think we only just scratched the surface here. So hopefully there'll be a few more of them further down the line. I think the thing I liked most about this conversation was that we both had some different ideas about many things, but we were able to share and appreciate each other's perspectives. And I had quite a long list of questions that I wanted to tackle with Dick, but this conversation, it just kept flowing. And before we knew it, 90 minutes had passed. So I want to say a huge thank you to Dick himself for making the time to chat. I really appreciated his openness and his honesty, and the amount of effort he puts into documenting his experiences through these two books. It really is a monumental achievement. I think, like myself, he has a very warts and all approach to psychedelics, so he doesn't shy away from some of the more difficult aspects of something like DMT. And yeah, he's just a great guy. It was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did and find something useful in here, or at least find it entertaining. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons who support the show. It's through their donations that I can do things like buy books to research guests like today. So it's not like it's only me you're supporting. It also gets passed on to other creators within the psychedelic community. Dick's books are available on Amazon and there's a link below. So if you're looking for a good read while you're sipping your pina coladas by the swimming pool, then go and pick that up. I got the Kindle version because I am a child of the future, and also because Mother Ayahuasca told me not to murder trees. Anyway, that's enough of my rambling, so without any further ado, I bring you Dick Kahn, author of DMT and My Occult Mind. Enjoy. So, I am here with fellow psychonaut, author of multiple books on the topic of psychedelic exploration, and no doubt master of incognito disguises, Dick Kahn. So Dick, thanks so much for making the time to talk to me. I've been really looking forward to this one for a while. I know I've been trying to set it up over the summer. But yeah, I was actually recommended to talk to you by some of my subscribers. And since we started arranging this, which again, it was like a few weeks ago, I've been reading some of your books and I've been sort of making a few notes. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you, mate. And really looking forward to picking your brain about some of these experiences I've been reading about.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, really excited to be here. Thank you.
Good, mate. So I think probably one way to start things going is that although I've kind of introduced you as like an author, I think that's really just a way that you document something much bigger that seems to be going on with what you do and all these incredible experiences you're having. So yeah, a good place to start. So how would you describe what you do?
That's a really good place to start because I'm just a couple of days back from a brilliant ayahuasca retreat. And sweet. I was thinking, I was like, looking at my books when I came back, not reading them, but just looking at them. And I kind of realized that, there's no way I could produce those books were it not for interacting with those other entities. So, I know people write books, but these books or this genre of book is quite unique. And I'm not saying there's only me writing these kind of books, but this looks like a new genre. And these experiences are profound, life-changing interactions with otherworldly entities, powerful otherworldly entities. And there's no way there would be no books if it weren't for that, mysterious mind manifesting other of hidden nature. So, I have to sort of recognize that I was sort of pushing the pen or pressing the button, so to speak. But yeah, these experiences are not of my mind alone. These are interactions with powerful agency of hidden nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there is actually a genre for what you do, mate. And I don't know if you've had this comparison before, but I think there's a gonzo element to what you do because, I'm sure you've heard of Hunter Thompson and sort of his sort of adventures or misadventures. But I thought it was very similar to what you do. You're inserting yourself into this narrative and the narrative is happening to you, but you are also the narrative. It's a very sort of gonzo way of doing it, I think. So I think you're in good company there, mate, with what you do.
That's really high praise, Rob. Thank you very much. I'm not sure I see it like that myself. I had those 3 very determined years where I went pretty hard at DMT and, I was keeping myself to myself. By that I mean I wasn't on social media, I wasn't sharing each and every experience. It was just very much in my own little bubble with my family. And I'll be honest, a large part of the motivation was not just curiosity, but it kind of felt like I was taking on the world, so to speak, you know, and that was really exciting.
Well, that was another aspect that jumped out to me from your book is it does seem like this very transformative journey, not just in what was going on sort of psychedelically, but with you yourself. I mean, I think by your own admission, you talked about being quite naive. I think this was after the publishing of your first book, and you kind of had this viewpoint of this people will just be interested in this because I mean, shit, it's happened to me and this is like amazing. So you kind of expected the same kind of excitement to be out there, but you yourself had to go through this kind of social media sort of personality transformation to get it out there. So there really is this kind of to say that the journey was transformative, I think it goes across sort of more ways than one. But I suppose, I mean, how do you think of that kind of that transformation, and how, I suppose, like, what were you thinking in terms of getting people to sort of like pay attention, and how's your viewpoint adjusted in towards like your second book?
So I think that transformation is still ongoing, and I don't see transformation ever coming to an end in this lifetime, future lifetimes. I think that's always going to be going on. When I first started, you know, I mean, because I'm self-published, I had to sort of do all my own marketing, and the first kind of like online promotions I did, probably I over-egged them. You know, I was talking about my research was revolutionary, and a couple of people pulled me up on that, and it kind of looked like I'd overlooked sort of Strassman's epic research that put me onto it. But all I meant by revolutionary is that I was kind of like putting my neck on the line. I genuinely thought after publishing my book, I was going to get the police knocking on my door, you know, a few days later. So I probably over-egged it to begin with, and a couple of people were really kind and pulled me and said, look, you might want to just tone it down a bit. But, you know, I wasn't being disrespectful, and I wasn't thinking, you know, nobody else has experienced this, and I wasn't unmindful of Strassman's research, quite the opposite. So I did tone it down a little bit. That transformation is still ongoing. I have a long way to go. I don't want to say it is a journey, but it is. That's what it is, and it's. I'll be honest. I don't see it as like promoting myself. I mean, these are wonderful opportunities to kind of share my stories and about my research. But for me, I'm not promoting myself. I'm more promoting the substance and the experiences from the substance and my sort of occult analysis of those experiences. I'd rather do that than promote myself.
Yeah, and I think that comes across in your writings, mate. It's very, very sincere, and yeah, I mean, I think that's probably what's kind of like so kind of attractive and sort of appealing about your personality. It is very sort of down to earth. Again, this is something I try and put into my own kind of into my own channel and the own content I produce, and I think it's these kind of voices is what I was looking for when I first started getting into this, and I thought there was a lack of it. So I think it's like I said, that kind of transparent sincerity, and again, this came across in a lot of your experiences in the first book, which I think you acknowledge yourself that you probably wrote a bit too much about them, even the kind of ones that didn't really go anywhere. You're still writing about them.
Yeah.
But still, it's good to do that, because there is a kind of mentality where that everything has to be just amazing and everything has to be sort of fairy tales and unicorns, and that's not always the case. There is a kind of a gradient of these experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, since I published the first book, which I've since retired and reissued as a much smaller revised version, at the moment I'm going through a phase of I am reading so many books. And as a consequence of that, it's made me think, damn, what have I done? Because there are some really smart minds out there, you know, much smarter than mine, and they've published books, and some of them I'm, you know, blown away by. I think, you know, my God, it's not that I'm trying to compete with these people. I'm just trying to be myself. But I've realized in sort of pursuing authorship in this genre, there are some very big giants there, and yeah, you know, I don't feel like I'm trying to compete with them or stand shoulder to shoulder with them. I'm kind of like thinking, damn, what have I done? I kind of like, you know, I probably didn't realize what I was doing when I published the first book, and now it's kind of dawned on me. And you know, I'm aiming for a third and final book in the DMT and My Occult Mind series, and I know it's going to have to be, for me, it's going to have to be a masterpiece to my own satisfaction before I dare to publish it, because of that recognition of greater minds than mine.
Yeah, and I think it's that what you just said, that you do acknowledge that there are these, this amazing sort of scientific and sort of philosophical people out there. That's all the more reason why I think your greatest asset is your integrity and it is your honesty. And it's because, you're not going to be, the greatest sort of scientific, the Rick Strassmans who understand all the sort of the chemistry and stuff like that. That's their role. And, some of the greatest philosophers, that's their role. But I think for someone like yourself, the role that you have, it is the important role. It is the role of the kind of the everyman. It's the sort of, you're not, necessarily trying to, like you say, insert yourself into some, I've got the answers, I've got the sort of, everyone listen to me. I think that's a very important voice, mate.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I have to play to my strengths and recognize that, my strengths are, adherence to truth, working class roots, and a real genuine sort of passion for this subject and this discussion.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'd like to sort of like get into talking about some of your different experiences. Can I just come back to something you mentioned earlier? You mentioned you just come back from an ayahuasca retreat. So is that your first time trying ayahuasca, or?
No, that's my third retreat. So on previous retreats, I would say I've tried ayahuasca several times before. If I had the financial wherewithal and sort of, I don't want to say freedom from family, because my wife's great, she gives me that freedom. But if I had the capacity in terms of time and finance to do more, I would have done more. But yeah, this was a domestic retreat, Friday night, Saturday night, and wow, I mean, yeah, so it's my third one, and it was just the first night was just extremely intense, and that's really what I wanted. I wanted to see how powerful it could be, and oh my God, it didn't hold back. It really did put it on me.
Yeah, I had a few ayahuasca ceremonies before I sort of really had that sort of eye-opening experience, and I think it was about I did a couple in Europe, and then it was when I went and did one in Peru, and it was like, oh my God, now I've seen what people are talking about here. Yeah. So I think one thing I'd love to sort of like start with and get into is about your perspective on what is actually happening within these experiences. And I think this might be somewhere we can may possibly civilly disagree. But is my understanding correct that your perspective is that you would think that this is like an external conscious system or life form that we're sort of contacting through these substances?
To an extent, yeah, you could phrase it like that. I guess I'm kind of saying that there's a hidden nature, a hidden kingdom, a parallel universe, a parallel world, however you want to phrase it, and that unseen kingdom is occupied with I would suggest a vast diversity of conscious agencies, life forms, entities, and I think with DMT, the initial effects of DMT, which I'm sure we'll speak about, seem to promote consistently a life-changing interaction with, I would say, higher beings from that realm. And I'm not saying it's all higher beings there. I think esoteric and occult literature points to the occupancy of those kingdoms having really sort of diverse populations, with some equal to man, some far lower than man, and some much and very much higher than man. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I'm subtly arguing in my books.
Yeah, I think the flavour that came across definitely seemed to be leaning towards the external. I think that's where I think I lean more towards the internal, in the sort of terms of this being a journey through sort of consciousness and sort of ancestral archetypes and stuff like that. So, but again, there's nowhere I'd plant my flag here and say this is absolutely it. And I think the landscape that you just described there of it's, yeah, I mean, who knows if it's planes of existence. It could be internal, it could be external. It's sort of, it's out of time. It's transcendent. So there's a whole,
yeah. I'll be honest, Rob. I find these conversations fascinating because it's two different schools of thought, and look, I've sort of made friends with people around the world, and some of them far more experienced than me with DMT, you know, in terms of how far they've been and how many times they've been there. And I kind of like put forth my interpretation and give examples where I say, you know, this example really sort of points to it being something other than my own mind. And they'll just kind of come back and say, oh, no, that's like tactile hallucinations. And I'm like, I'm arguing you can't write it off by saying it's tactile hallucinations. But it's a fascinating subject. It really is. And it's a great topic for discussion.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the most fascinating subject, and certainly what I've found from my own experiences that, like I said, I could not plant a flag anywhere because I've had extremely sort of, you know, what I've described as like sort of sci-fi, futuristic, sort of, you know, spread across the cosmos type experiences, and I've also had what felt very ancient and ancestral kind of experiences. I've had something that's somewhere in the middle of those two, ones which didn't seem like anything at all other than sort of pure consciousness. So you really could. I have had like literal visions of like being on some kind of space station type thing there. So that contrasted with like the very earthy, organic-y, again, the more stuff I kind of tend to get from ayahuasca. It's, yeah, who knows? And so that's why I kind of like, I think the thing which I could balance, or this is why I guess I lean more towards the internal, because I think from the internal perspective, I can manage all those expectations. I have sci-fi thoughts, I can have organic thoughts, I can have earthy thoughts, and I've got ancestral thoughts. So that all seems to work internally. Whereas if you sort of, you know, the people who go for the very sort of, it's dimensional portals to, you know, Xenu place or whatever, that's very specific. And so I would kind of stray away from that. But yeah, I mean, let flesh out if you've got any further thoughts on it.
I tell you what, Rob, if somebody came to me, if a really sort of like special, rare individual came to me and said, Dick, I can disclose to you now what the absolute truth of the matter is. And on condition of me disclosing that truth to you, you must cease your DMT research, withdraw your books from sale, and wrap up this Dick Khan thing that you've got going on. And that's the condition of me disclosing the truth. I would say it's all wrapped up. I just want the truth, because that's what it's about for me. It's kind of like pursuing that, you know. It's not about, if I'm wrong and I find through my own research or other people's research convinces me I'm wrong, I'm not bothered about the fact I've been wrong. I'm just happy that I found wow, because that truth is, it's almost something tangible within your heart, you know, and it's gonna, I don't know, it's gonna make your heart sing, because you're like, wow, that mystery has been solved. What's the next one?
Well, that's kind of bold statement. So I think I would probably go on the other side of that, because for me, I would say the human experience that I'm having is kind of paramount. This is, you know, whatever else is happening, if there's other planes of existence, or if there's other sort of, you know, other realms of spirits or aliens or whatever, this is it. This is what I've got to interface with anything. So my kind of human experience is like primary to me. And I think, and if there are like realms, you know, like that happen sort of like near-death experience, or when you die and things like that, that's all going to happen anyway. So I don't need to. I'm not in a rush to sort of, you know, I'll die when I'm good and ready. But I'm sort of, and the kind of example that I use here is that if somebody came up to me and said, look, I can explain to you 100% scientifically with no indisputable evidence why and how, and the mechanics of how you love your wife, I'd be like, I don't care. There's no amount of data that is going to assist me with my human condition of like, if you came and brought me the pheromone statistics, and you know, maybe she's been drugging me with some sort of, you know, some Persephone perfume or something like that. I don't know, but there's nothing that would.
Yeah, I get you.
To me, meaning is everything. So I would, in your position, I would turn away the truth, and I would focus on the personal experience, I think.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. I suppose it's like the rose, isn't it? Science can do all kinds of things with the rose. It can measure it, it can analyze it, but it can't explain why the rose is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing that comes out to me most from these sort of psychedelic experiences. To me, that they are pure meaning. It's like meaning in its purest form, and that's kind of why they're so like transcendent and so slippery, because we could swap stories forever, and it's very hard to sort of convey. I mean, you can do it a little bit, you know, and if you've had a similar experience, then you might flash and go, oh right, yeah, I get what you know about it. But it's a very sort of a personal experience, and I think that's where I try and focus. I always look for the meaning within these experiences rather than the kind of the literal truth of them. So even my space station example, like if I find myself on the interplanetary like hub of consciousness, which is like Deep Space Nine, sort of orbiting some black hole somewhere, then I'm like, okay, why am I seeing this? What does it mean to me? Rather than sort of coming back and saying to everyone, I've seen it. I've seen the interplanetary hub. It's there. It's real. You know, which I must admit, this is one thing when I was reading your stuff, and you, again, we talked about like you being a sort of a little bit naive and sort of evangelistic at the beginning. We've all been there, mate. I was exactly the same, like saying to people, like, this is amazing. You've got to try this, and I was just ranting like a lunatic.
Yeah. I tell you what, then let's bring some experiences into it. But before I do that, when I was a little boy, a magazine came out. I think it's called The Unexplained, and you know, I really loved that kind of stuff. And I was really young, and I'm kind of leafing through it, and you get to a few pages where it's talking about UFOs, you know, and it's got some grainy black and white images of sort of classic disc UFOs, and I'm looking at them thinking thought that every ufologist must have thought, you know, wow, look at that. It looks like a genuine craft. Why don't they just come down and land and say hello? And then, you know, a few days later, I'd be kind of like in the lounge at home, and I'm really young at this age, and my mum would go out of the lounge, and I'd kind of feel that there was something in the upper corner of the room looking at me. I could sense it, you know. I was like, I can't see anything, but it's like there's something there watching me, and couldn't make that sort of connection that, you know, there is this sort of hidden other. My mind was far too young. But fast forward quite a few years, and I'm smoking DMT indoors, and then when I take the DMT outdoors, something happens, and I've smoked it outside quite a few times, and I've occasionally found, you know, the black orb UFO will appear either at the conclusion of a profound experience, or at the tail end of a sort of sub-breakthrough experience, or if it's not a black orb UFO slowly traversing the sky, it might be what ufologists would call an earthlight, or whatever creamy mauve kind of orb slowly traversing the sky. And I don't know, I think that's really interesting, because it does point to kind of some other that's not just in my mind.
Have you ever heard of a guy called Donald Hoffman, who's got a theory called interface theory perception?
I have not, but I'll have to make a note of that. Donald Hoffman, yeah.
Donald Hoffman, yeah. I'll try and I'm going to butcher this now, so let me try and outline what his gist was. So yeah, his shtick is that everything that we are seeing is a user interface for an underlying substrate. Now, there's a difference here because there's a very common sort of set of psychedelic theories that everything is imagination. There's that, and this is slightly different to that. It's not that everything is imagination. It's that everything is like when you're on your computer and you know you see like, you know, a Windows folder and you see an icon to launch, you know, Internet Explorer or whatever. But that's not really what's happening in the computer. In the computer is zeros and ones. and you've got a user interface to make it easier to work with. And that's what this guy's proposing, is that everything that we sort of see around us is a user interface for a much stranger reality, which is where the primary thing within this reality is consciousness. So we think that matter comes first, and as I do this, I'm banging on the table, and everything around me is physical, and I live my life as though matter comes first. But this guy's shtick is that consciousness comes first, and basically everything. This is more or less like wearing a set of VR goggles. It's just reality is being rendered to suit sort of what's happening in consciousness, and in that sort of viewpoint, what you've just described with the black orbs appearing. You are seeing them because you are in a different conscious state. So then different sort of conscious systems are now being represented as this black orb. And like if you had, like, say, a conscious, so all we've got is networked conscious systems. And if there's one which is like something that is particularly tranquil and at rest, we might see that as a tree, a very slow moving, still alive. We recognize it as an alive system, but very slow moving. Or we might see something that's very hyper and sort of, we think of as less conscious, which is a mouse or something like that. So that might be something worth you looking into. It's a very weird theory, but it does explain a lot of stuff.
It is and it isn't, because I mean, did you say it's Donald Hoffman?
Yeah.
I mean that kind of that approach of consciousness first. I mean that's one of the sort of primary considerations, if not the primary consideration, of the sort of esoteric and occult mindset, that matter comes from mind. The universe is a mental creation. It's not that mind comes from matter, but contrariwise. With the black orb UFO, I buy what you're saying, but then what if I then go indoors and ask my family to come out and they seem the same thing, and they can't smoke DMT?
Well, again, the actual DMT element isn't sort of particularly critical to it. So that would.
All right. Okay.
So that would be, again, that would be dependent on that sort of change of matter. So it's just that whatever we're sort of seeing around us, which we interpret as physical reality. Again, I've got to apologize. I'm not super spotted up on this, guys. And I'm not planting a flag here to say I super believe it. I just think it's interesting. But yeah, he would say, is that a UFO could appear because that's just sort of, what those conscious systems need to appear. And it's a bit like, like if you're a conscious system and you need help, and then something appears in reality, like, whether it be a substance like a plant teacher that you turn to, or a therapist, things come in and out of your life as you kind of, in and out of the user interface, I should say, as you sort of, as you sort of require them. But what is, I mean, the example even goes far as like, there is no moon. There is just, the moon just appears because you, for whatever reason, you need the moon to appear. And it's like playing Grand Theft Auto. There is no Ferrari to your right, but if you turn your viewpoint to the right, then there is a Ferrari. But as soon as you turn your view away, then it's not there. But there is something there being visualized, kind of thing.
It very much deconstructs perception, though, and I like those arguments, those philosophical arguments. But I think it's good to have sort of like feet on the ground kind of view of reality, and I like all those deconstructions of perception, but I don't know, I'm not sure. They're nice and they're abstract, but I kind of think, well, where's it really taken us? It's kind of like making you question your own perception perhaps too much, and then if you're interacting with other people and deconstructing their sort of perception, I don't know, it's fascinating. But I tell you what, let me break down what I see as the DMT experience in terms of outlining the principles, because I found from my research that the initial effect of DMT, and this is not considering hidden realities outside myself, not considering entities, is it very powerfully amplifies some immaterial aspect of ourself, some mind stuff, psycho-spiritual substance, soul, whatever you want to label it, I don't care. But it seems to project out powerfully and rapidly, bubble-like, And if you're indoors, it's going to very rapidly fill the room. It's going to make the room either look crystal clear, or with a sufficient dose, it's going to make that room. It's going to make it look like you're in a very turbulent underwater atmosphere, and that's the seething energy of this mind stuff. I have assumed that some becomes trapped within the room, and some must transmit through the room because of its otherworldly nature. Whereas outdoors, you can actually much better appreciate that sort of huge outpouring. I mean, it's just incredible how much of this hidden immaterial stuff is housed somewhere within our being. And I did this one time, and I'm looking up, and it's kind of filled the local sky with this sort of dense, otherworldly, uncommon substance. And a pigeon flies through, and this has happened many times before. It leaves the sort of multiple tracer trails, whether it's a pigeon, crow, whatever. But this one time, this pigeon must have flown low, and the effect on its visuals must have been so profound that I heard the pigeon crash beside me, just a few feet away, and I could hear it hit the floor pretty hard, and it's flapping its wings. And I was in such a sort of, I don't know, bizarre state. It's not that I didn't dare. I didn't look at the pigeon, but I could hear it struggling to sort of bring itself, back to a condition where it could fly away. And I thought that was really a really good example of something other than myself experiencing the effects of something really bizarre, and that being DMT significantly projecting bubble like some strange immaterial aspect of my human being. And for me, that becomes then the starting point for going into talk of entities, because people talk about set and setting, and that initial effect of DMT has ultimately very profoundly changed your setting. You've sent out a massive signal, and whether it's going to attract an entity that very powerfully imposes upon you, or I don't know, something high in the sky that traverses slowly as a black orb UFO. I don't know. It's I guess that's where I'm coming from. But again, I've said I know the benefits of remaining open-minded, and that I do.
So I think that what you just described with the kind of the projection of energy, that's certainly something that I think comes much more into play in the sort of the ayahuasca circles. Because I think I would say probably most people, or at least most people I'm aware of, tend to see like sort of smoking or vaporizing DMT as a very solo experience, or at least a very limited group. Whereas ayahuasca is these sort of much bigger social groups, and you do get that sense of energy projects into the room, and then you all start feeding off each other's experience. And I mean, I've certainly had, a lot of people start talking about things like sort of like telepathy and stuff like that. I won't say I've necessarily had that experience myself, but I certainly have had the experience of a shared experience and what they call energetic transfer in sort of ayahuasca, and particularly when one person starts like throwing up on it, then everyone just you start feeling each other's sort of energy and pain and stuff like that. And one of them, I mean, there was one time I was in a circle, and there was this young lady there, and she just screamed like I've never heard anything before. And it was one of the most like harrowing like sounds just cut through, and like I'm sure like the whole room just felt that kind of that energy. It was it's you get a lot of very sort of like weird synchronicities going on in those groups. So how do you find the sort of the difference in have you got like a preference between the sort of these more social ayahuasca thing and your own sort of research?
I personally think it's easier to go on an ayahuasca retreat than it is to commit to properly smoking DMT. I mean, despite how many times I've smoked it, it doesn't make it any easier. You might be able to develop strategies that make it more easier to put yourself in that position and commit to it. But I'll be honest,
it gets worse, man, doesn't it? I mean, it's...
I was going to say, but at the moment, those strategies just they ain't working for me.
I was going to say, when you talked about having the third book on the way, I hope you still got an appetite for this. I mean, you've got, it's pretty impressive, mate.
Well, we have to see. I mean, I'll certainly be incorporating ayahuasca into those. You know, I mean, my previous two books have always been with the classic DMT machine glass bottle pie. And now I've sort of, promoted myself to a vape device. And I've got to be honest, those vape devices, they are ridiculously efficient and effective. You are using so little DMT, but you're using it so well that like 2 3 what seemed like really mild intakes compared to the glass bottle pipe, and wow, you are deep into it. It's yeah. So there's no guarantee I've still got the appetite, but I would say I've got the appetite for a third book. So I probably have to force myself to make it happen. But the ayahuasca, I find, is I think you can, because of that sociability and the whole ceremony. I really buy into that. And those Icaros songs. I mean, it's beautiful. So. I mean, these are hyperspace language that the traditional shamans and Amazonian users have brought back from that realm. And for me, they just tick all those hyperspace boxes. It's not Portuguese, it's not English, it's hyperspace language, and it just makes so much sense. It's beautiful. I really buy into it.
Yeah. I mean, I've sort of got quite a good relationship with shaman over who's a Shipibo shaman, so that's like the sort of the tribe most commonly associated with ayahuasca, or at least I'm most familiar with.
Yes.
And yeah, I was getting him to talk me through some of this stuff, because this again is when I was very much in, like you described, that it's very much truth secrecy, like tell me give me the knowledge of stuff. And yeah, the way he described it was, because I saw him one night in ceremony, and he was just stood up and he was belting out these Icaros and just waving his arms like a madman. And I could just see this, like the sort of Shipibo language, when you see these kind of Shipibo textures, that's actually a language that they can read it.
Yeah, so, I believe.
So he was like, he was just orchestrating this stuff, and I said to him like Wheeler, what the fuck was that? And he's like, they're just so blasé. It's like it's the way it is, I just orchestrate it. It's like that's how it is. That's the agreement we have. I ask them to come in, and they come in, and that's it. It does what it does. But it's
what's really interesting is there's kind of like different styles of those Icaros, and there's one particular style that's really sort of upbeat and boisterous and jolly, and it seems to induce purging. So we're in this retreat, and everybody's in their zone, going through whatever they're going through, and then the music changes, and I'm laid down, I'm in my zone, and I start to hear people like puking. And then I'm like, oh, mate, this music is like it's doing something to my intestines, Yeah. Like, 10 minutes later, I'm purging into the bucket at the end of a mattress. And it's just astonishing how these songs can have that effect on your body via your mind. It's incredible.
Yeah, and they actually, I think it's just as well as that, is that's how they do it deliberately. So they will... Yeah. So the shaman will talk about, they will build you up to an intensity and get you to this point. And sometimes, depending on sort of what dosha, you do get this feeling like, I cannot take any more of this even this sound, like, and it sort of, it pulls it out of you.
Yeah.
And then the sort of like the wave will break, and you'll get a much gentler Icaro, and you just sat there thinking, this is just amazing. It's a very orchestrated performance, I think, is a sort of, perhaps that's the only word I can think for it, really, because there's a very definite structure to it. And on some of the retreats I've been on, where it's been on like sort of for weeks or longer, then even from day to day, they plan, okay, so this is the day we're going to do this, and this is the day we're going to do, and it's a different set of Icaros for each thing. So that culture's just fascinating. I think
I really hope it grows, because I mean, in the UK at the moment, obviously with what's going on with the pandemic and coronavirus, there's a news item come out, and it's saying that problem drinking at home, people drinking alcohol, it's doubled since the pandemic. And you think, oh man, that's terrible. That's going to result in all kinds of secondary issues with relationship problems and difficulties for children in situations where they can't get out from a parent who's struggling and turning to drink because of that. And you just you don't know, imagine those kind of things. It's such a shame, and you can sort of see this I'm going to call it a medicine, this medicine and these retreats and these experiences, so beneficial. I mean, in my opinion, to mental health, physical health, spiritual health, emotional health, it ticks so many boxes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I couldn't agree more, mate. And I've really, the fact that I couldn't go on a retreat this year, because I had plans to go away in May. I was going to go and do 2 weeks in Peru. And then that obviously fell through because of the pandemic. And I felt that so much like that. So with this whole pandemic thing, I think the world is kind of like crying out for contact with each other, for sort of, which they may not recognize it, but is a kind of a spiritual need. And in that moment, the opposite has happened. We've been locked down. The sort of options are taken away from us. And I think I've certainly, I felt the sort of the pinch of that. And I totally agree with everything that he's saying about it being a medicine. For me, it definitely was. I mean, I had some sort of, some emotional struggles from a childhood. And this is the thing that has allowed me to sort of face those things. So I'm a strong advocate for that. Yeah, these are amazing substances, not just in the psychoactive effects and the awesomeness of it, which certainly is there, but in the potential for what they can do. This is it's almost that kind of like amazing that these things I've been sort of like underground for so long.
It's a world-changing substance and a world-changing experience. It's just, I don't know. It's such a shame. It feels like a little bit immature to say it's such a shame. It's highly illegal. I just don't know. I suppose these people operating these retreats, they're heroes. They know the risks that they're taking, but these are heroes. They genuinely believe in what they're doing. The retreat I go to, they're consummate professionals. It's just an excellent. The staff are so attentive. The ceremony from the opening to the closing ceremony, it's just perfect. It's it's a shame it's so few and far between. And I think a lot.
I think you've got a rougher deal of it there in England actually than what we've got on the mainland, because certainly here it's not. You have to be sort of careful with the terminology. It's not legal, but it's not criminalized in the same way that it is in the UK, where I think it's UK they put it on the same classification as like heroin or cocaine or something.
Yeah.
Whereas here you can, or particularly in Spain or like Portugal, you can openly advertise. Ayahuasca falls into a kind of a grey area there, and so do a lot of other things like 5-MeO toad medicine and Cambo and things like that. So yeah, I think I kind of feel for you, mate, that the UK is a little bit draconian here in how they sort of clamp down on things, but certainly in like Spain and even here in Switzerland and Portugal, you can more or less openly advertise sort of things like ayahuasca retreats, which is.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Yeah, I had no idea. I thought it was like blanket sort of policy across Europe. That it was the same sort of high category of illegality. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Lucky you.
Well, so the ones I tend to go to are in Spain. Just because that's where the shaman, there's a shaman who comes over from Peru, this wheeler guy. And so he does these retreats in Spain, and and it's nice. You get like a sort of a nice mountain sort of Spanish, setting. Yeah, you get this traditional sort of Shipibo guy. So is that what you have in the situation in England? You've got a sort of like, is it a Peruvian shaman who comes over, or what's the setup?
So no, these are natives, indigenous people, UK people, and that they're clearly very experienced. Some of them have been initiated into Amazonian, well-known Amazonian tribes. So they're singing the Icaros songs, and they're singing them perfectly. And I know that because at the last retreat I had the benefit of actually being in a retreat with a master shaman, and wow, I mean that's just another level. But no, I mean, these are UK people, and they're doing a great job. I mean, they're creating their own songs, singing their own songs, playing recorded music, live music's just, fantastic. You got the harpe, you got the is it Sangaro, the ray of light, the eye drops. I don't know if you've ever experienced those.
I've not done. I've done the rapé. I've done plenty of. I've never done the eye drops.
Well, I'll be honest. I've experienced the harpe before, and it's a real sort of explosive assault on your nose. And you tell people, oh yeah, it's worth it. And then when you do it again for the first 5 minutes, you're kind of like not sure whether you've given good advice because you're just in such a nasal and your eyes are a mess. But obviously after 5 or 10 minutes, when the power of a medicine becomes prevalent, you think, wow, that is real. I'm glad I did that. It's really good.
Yeah, with rapé, it was one that I definitely had to train myself to sort of get into it, because when I went to do my first retreat in Peru, I'd had rapé before then at like with some friends who were gonna, and the sort of what they'd fed me was like that rap. This was just happening all the time on Peru, so to get used to it. So I was like, right, it's a bit like kind of like when you're a kid and you try smoking, you try, it's like, oh, this is horrible, but you don't want to look like a knob, so you sort of make yourself get into smoking. So I kind of trained my nose out of that desensitization, because when you first do it, it's like, say, it's like being hit with a cricket bat or something in the face. That's right. But now I've quite got a taste for it. And sort of trying all the different kinds. But I just wondered, did you ever try the 5-MeO Toad DMT?
Oh, still not. I think I did an interview a few weeks ago, and I'm showing off this little pipe I've got loaded with 5-MeO DMT. It's still sat behind me on my desk, and as yet, no. So I'm very fortunate. I've got friends who've enabled me to have access to the synthetic and the genuine toad medicine, but as yet, and I'm not gonna. I could sit here and say, Rob, because of the lockdown, that the kids have been at home, the wife's been at home, there's been no opportunity, but that wouldn't be quite true, because there's been opportunities where I could have sort of taken the pipe and sort of walked off into the fields and found a quiet spot and done it. I'm terrified of it. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise, but I know I'm gonna have to experience it, and I'm very excited by it, but at the moment, far more terrified than excited at the prospect.
Yeah. I mean, I don't begrudge that feeling, mate. I've done 5-MeO one time, and that was the one time I did actually do DMT outdoors, like what you described earlier. And so I was in this kind of like forest canopy at the top of this mountain, I did it, and I just like kind of flopped back onto my back, and I was staring up through the trees, and I'd seen all the sort of the leaves interconnecting all above me, and just where you talk about the black orbs appearing, I started seeing chemical symbols appearing, much like the one on your t-shirt, and these started floating across them like the trees were talking to each other in sort of chemical hormones, which is apparently what they do. I didn't know this at the time. Yeah. And then I had this kind of inward vision of being the toad, and I was like, I felt like, okay, does this toad, does it know what it's doing here? Can it feel its own sort of medicine here, or is it like forever cut off from experience? I felt this like great sorrow for the toad, that it would like, perhaps it's like, a bit of snot, like, we just don't think it's just another bodily fluid.
Yeah. How bizarre that substance is in a toad, isn't it? I mean, I know it's within certain plants, but how bizarre that it's in that particular toad. It's really strange.
Well, yeah, I've just done a video that sort of leaned into this, because I was talking about the book Dune, and which is sort of based around this psychoactive substance, which, as the book describes, comes from worm shit. Basically, it's like giant sandworm worm shit.
Yeah.
And I remember when I read this book as a kid, I was like, I cannot be reading this right. There's no way these people are eating worm shit and like getting high. And then as I've gone into my sort of adult life, and you find out some guy worked out to extract this particular like, how did you work this out? How did this happen that you picked up this toad and got this, squeeze this thing out, and then thought to smoke it rather than just wash your hands? Well,
I mean, do you know what? I think it's a really super profound and interesting question, because the same question arises with ayahuasca. How, with so many plants in the Amazon and so many, cross permutations for, different recipes, how on earth did they work out that, this leaves and this bark are gonna give this experience? And that's a question I'm really going to tackle in my third book, and I'm really excited. I've got some good ideas about that, and I've heard people with a much greater reputation than me, and I've seen them in conference, and they've said, oh, you must have worked it out by trial and error, and I just cannot buy that, because the permutations are in the billions. That just doesn't make sense to me. Let's keep trying, and then, all right, okay, after like countless generations, if not aeons, we've hit on something here, boys.
Exactly.
I don't buy it.
But also, just it's what it would take to get to the ayahuasca. So assuming you found by fluke or whatever the right combination, then to think, okay, right, we've got these two.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll boil it for 36 hours into possibly the most pungent, bitter, foul tasting thing, and then once we've got that, let's just keep necking it until something happens, and then people are throwing the guts and stuff. Everything about it would be telling you, do not drink this.
Yeah, that's right.
So how they did it, and then it's very hard not to put a lot of stock in that the plants told me to do it, and sort of it was a kind of like a divine instruction from Mother Ayahuasca or whatever, because anything else just seems even less likely than that. It's
I think I'm probably going to be building on that, but I'm really going to throw I got a really sort of unique take on it, and I have that because of my sort of long-standing interest in esoteric and occult literature, especially theosophy. Mm-hmm. So I feel I can really sort of put something. I'm not saying it's the truth, but I think a lot of people will find the idea that I propose really interesting. And again, when I say the idea I propose, I'm really leaning on sort of esoteric and occult interpretations of mankind's early histories.
Yeah. Can I just jump on that word? Because I think it's very interesting how you sort of use the word occult, and that you put this as kind of like front and center. Because it is a very loaded word.
Oh my God, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it conjures up imagery, Aleister Crowley and sort of this. So when you're using the word occult, are you using it as a kind of a substitute for mystical, or do you really sort of like see sort of like something like DMT as part of that occult world, or how do you define it?
So I'll start that by initially saying that I think ultimately the most accurate and meaningful interpretation of the DMT experience will ultimately prove to be an occult interpretation. So what I mean by occult, and I guess I'm using it in its light guise, LITE, light guise, is that it means hidden, concealed, shut off from view. I mean, regrettably, it does come with a lot of baggage and darker connotations, but there's also a very wide, broad-ranging, deep philosophies behind that. The perennial philosophy that Aldous Huxley spoke of. So it's not just about Crowley. And, if people want to know what I think about Crowley, I really rate Crowley as he was a first-rate occultist, but I just don't feel I'm really drawn to his works. But I recognise that he was one of those rarest of breeds, a natural-born magician. Mm-hmm. So to me, I guess I'm using it in its light guise, and I knew I would alienate some readers by including it in the title of my works. But I think it's a word that could really do with a rehabilitation. It's a taboo, addled word, and in this day and age, there's not many taboo addled words out there, but that's one of them. So I'm hoping to rehabilitate it, and I think I'm doing a reasonably good job with that. And I know people who have been put off because of the title, and then they've read the books and they've been very positive and complimentary. I mean, it means hidden, so
Yeah. I think I would definitely put myself as one of those, mate, because I certainly when I first use the word sort of occult, then I was kind of like, it was Freemasonry, it was Aleister Crowley. I was thinking all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think the way you use it in your book is certainly gives that word a good spring clean. And I think the other thing is, I think when you talk about rehabilitating it, it is seen, again, this is only my own perception of it, but seems quite old. It's almost like a Victorian kind of word. It doesn't get used much.
No,
I don't think it's not had the same kind of new age sort of spit and shine that things like mystical have had. So yeah, I think it's a if you're going to reclaim that, I would fully condone that.
Thanks, Rob. I really enjoyed how you worded that. That was really excellent. Thank you, man.
I do just want to check with you, mate. Have you got any sort of limitations on time, or?
I'm good for a little bit longer. Yeah, I'm okay.
All right, cool. Because what I did is when I told sort of people that I was going to be talking to, I put the sort of shout out on places like Reddit and some of my other social media channels and said, if anyone's got any questions for me, feed them in. So I've got a few questions here. I've only just compiled them all today, so I've not had a chance to read through them. So let me just have a quick look. Okay. So the first one was, and again, you can sort of answer these as in depth or as quick fire as you want to. How often would it be that you take DMT? I don't know whether they sort of mean during the duration of your writings or currently. And what would be the expected result of taking it too often?
Ooh, okay, good question. So I'm going to sort of answer that in terms of my 3 years where I went at it quite determinedly. And you know, it's not like I fixed myself a 3-year period. I kind of went as far as I got. You know, I'd written the first book and I was still going on doing the research and documenting the research. And then it got to a point where I just thought, you know what, I can't go on. I've done enough. I think I have to have a break from this. So in that 3-year period, I think if you break it down, did somebody say it's like every other day or every second day? But there were times where I would smoke it 2 or 3 times a day. I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend that these are all breakthrough experiences. I was investigating the effects of DMT. I'd not set myself up to say I'm going to go further or deeper or higher than anybody else. I wanted to come to my own understanding of the esoteric mechanics and what was happening. I feel I did that. So there'd be times where I'd had I'd have a terrifying or a really strong, profound experience, and I'd be like, that's me done, for a few days, a week, a couple of weeks. But then there'd be other times where I'd take it twice a day or sometimes 3 times a day. In terms of the effects, that's a brilliant question. Do you know what? I think it comes down to the individual. I don't think you can pontificate and say, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. It comes down to the individual. And I was operating on a sort of really willful drive, and as I say, I was not on social media. It's a case of go to work, come home. In my mind, I know I'm going to smoke DMT, but I would not think about it too much, because if you think about it, you're going to think, oh, this happened once and this happened last time. And so it's just there. I'm going to smoke DMT, but I'm not thinking about it. Go home. And it's like you're loading the pipe on a kind of like autopilot mentality. You're not thinking, you're just kind of going through the motions, go outside, lay down, look up at the sky, a few deep breaths, sit up, 3 tokes, lay back, boom. And then, and only then you can think, I did it, I've got something to write about. And I don't think it's affected me adversely. I think quite the opposite, but I'm not going to lie, Rob. I had experiences which are documented in my second book, and they're documented as candidly as I dare, because of ignoring my instincts, maybe when I should have listened, I did end up scarring my mental health. But I guess it's like a football player or a rugby player. If you're playing the game and you're not getting some injuries or scars, then how well are you playing the game? So even though I've scarred my mental health, I think it's ultimately been to my benefit in kind of making me realize how precious and pristine one's psyche is. And in these experiences, there's no kind of like health and safety representative, and there's no union you can go to, and there's no like, it's not like you've got a manager and you can say, look, I need some help. I've just interacted with a really difficult entity. Can you get somebody to have a word with it? Like that,
Wouldn't that be great?
You're very much on your own. So but I think it's down to the individual, and I know individuals I'm in touch with, I think they have the desire to smoke it or smoke it more often, and they struggle because they're terrified of it. I'm with them. We've already said about me and 5-MeO DMT, and the last time I vaped DMT was probably, it's about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm not sure when I'll do it again. I know I will, I just don't know when.
Yeah, the feeling that it reminded me of is, do you remember that, you know, when you were a kid and you knew that you'd done something wrong at school and your parents were going to kick your ass when you got home? That feeling in the pit of your smoach where it's like, you're walking home, it's like, oh, I'm going to get it, but you've got to go home anyway. That's what reminded me of that when I was smoking DMT. And I always say I'm jealous of people who do it for the first time because you don't know yet. You like, before you first tried it, that's bliss, that's heaven, because you've not yet tasted that kind of like a pure fear yet.
Very well said. And yeah, I mean, you know, I suppose it's a bit like losing your virginity and sex. You know, the first time may not always be the best, unlikely to be the best, but it's going to be really special.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned about sort of stuff that has affected with your medical health, but just in terms of your attitudes and sort of aspects of everyday life, has that sort of changed for like the better or worse? And if so, has those changes been welcomed by like your family or life?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like my family have kind of like commented, oh, you know, we know you've been going through a lot of DMT experiences and we've observed this change in you, but I've observed the changes in myself. So far more conscious of my relationship with my family, my wife and my two lovely boys, but also with colleagues at work and even with strangers, you know, mindful of the sort of how you interact with people, you know, and having time for them. And I think what I've really found, and this is through my work, is there's very few people actually listen. You know, listening is a real skill. And I think I was always kind of like, I'd got an auntie who'd influenced me positively with that. And I think DMT certainly augmented that, in that the strength of listening is better than kind of like clamoring to talk, you know, wanting to talk when somebody's talking and you kind of like formulating a response in your head without listening. So yeah, I would say that. And patience, and again, that's something my wife really helped me with. When I got married, I was always kind of impetuous and impatient, and my wife helped me with that. And I think my experience with DMT have kind of amplified that skill, that kind of attitude, and I think that's been really helpful. I used to sometimes go out to work on if I was working a late shift, and I'd be really irritable with my wife and my children, and I think from smoking DMT I realized it ain't their fault that I have to go to work. And since I've had that recognition, not once have I been irritable since, you know, going to work. It's like I just accept, look, you know, it's what I'm engaged with, it's what I'm doing. Why would I want to take it out on those that I love?
Yeah, exactly. I think gratitude is definitely always been like front and center of my experiences.
And another thing is really conscious of the influences upon my psyche. You know, what I choose to introduce to my psyche, whether it's a program on TV, a film, a book I read, or who I listen to, or what I engage with on social media. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm still work in progress. There are things that I look at online that perhaps I shouldn't, you know, and we spoke earlier about transformation. I recognize I'm still, you know, working on my sort of the dark side of my psyche. We've all got it. And I don't think DMT takes that away, but it maybe gives you tools and strategies to kind of accept that and maybe shed a little friendly light on it and try and incorporate it into your personality, your persona in a positive way.
Yeah, it's definitely you're balancing the light and the dark, or, you know, the shadow and stuff like that. And
yeah,
that's one of the things I do find a little bit suspectly repugnant about somebody who, you know, claims to have had some sort of amazing awakening or some sort of and like they've now become enlightened and they're just free of all that. And usually, I mean, you know, the sort of the classics when you see this is usually some kind of like horror story will come out of the closet of how they've treated somebody like shit. So I think that it is an ongoing journey. I don't think there's, I've said a few times, I don't think there is necessarily an end, or there's a bit where I'm just going to sit there and hover and be completely at peace and never want to, you know, watch a horror movie or play Call of Duty or something like that. You know, those things are part of me, but it's about it's this kind of balancing things or being more aware, like when, like what you sort of just described. It's like, yeah, sometimes I'm just an absolute dick for no reason, but I think I'm better at even if not being able to stop myself doing that, at least recognizing I'm doing that and not getting so puffed up on my own, like, you know, that was a, you know, some scathing put down, you know, put on some stranger just because I was being a dick on the internet, like. So
yeah.
Cool. So there's a question here going through your experiences. Have you ever had the God experience, or do you see the sort of like the God experience as different from this kind of consciousness experience, like what you're talking about?
So I think, if I understand the question, I think this is the experience of total non-duality. No, I haven't, you know, and I don't know what kind of individual I would be if I had. I mean, maybe I'd be one of the, I don't know. I don't want to disparage anybody who's been there. I think that must be such a shatter. I mean, I've had some profound experiences, but I think that experience of you know, total absorption into non-duality, I think after one of those, you probably wouldn't go back and smoke DMT again. So no, I've not had it, and it's not that I'm not pursuing it. You never know what you're going to get when you smoke DMT. So yeah, not at the moment. No, I haven't. But yeah, I mean, I think that probably has to be that has to be the ultimate, I imagine, isn't it? Total absorption of self into non-duality.
I would say I have had that experience.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't have to pursue it. I certainly wasn't looking for it. And it kind of happened by accident. Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because I cannot unexperience it.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily believe it or, like to say, take it literally. I always try and look for this meaning in it. But yeah, I have been in what I can only describe as the presence of God, and I'm completely not really. I would describe myself as a diehard atheist for the most part, and at least in terms of discounting the sort of the major religions. Like, I think there's a lot of man-made stuff there. But yeah, I had this kind of religious experience. I was like, what do I do with this? It's it's a strange one when you're not expecting it, because you think if you were like a sort of religious, you would be preloaded for it. But I wasn't, so I thought. After you've sort of finished your writings, did you have any problems sort of adjusting back to what I guess is like everyday life, or has it just become a sort of an ongoing piece of work now?
No, it's I think the writing is really therapeutic, and it really helps you reflect and integrate. It really helped me. I mean, it's not something I can go to work and speak about, but I think those 3 years where I wasn't on social media, I mean, I would occasionally speak to my wife, but she didn't initially sort of buy into my interpretation as to what was happening, despite the fact that, my wife's Muslim and she believes in angels and jinn. I think she's more on board now with it, because obviously she's listened to me and we've watched things on YouTube, and she can see that there's a sort of big underground movement going on that's got a lot of potential to sort of change culture, society, certainly individuals. Mm-hmm. But no, I do feel like I'm kind of balancing, sort of Dick Can DMT research with my sort of life as a family man with a reasonably good job, and responsibilities. And I put all those responsibilities first, I've kind of fallen off from Instagram and Facebook simply because I can't commit to all three platforms, Twitter being the third, without kind of like pushing my children away or pushing my wife away. And I'm just not prepared to do that, because then it becomes like, well, what a value really DMT on the individual, on the self, if it's kind of making me selfish and just pursuing followers and likes. I'd love to have more time to go on those platforms, but really I love my family too much to disregard them.
I think that's absolutely the way it should be, mate. And
Yeah.
I've certainly struggled with that balance, particularly when you're up and coming in these worlds, and you start off with like a very sort of tight community, and you feel like you sort of know these people.
Yeah.
And then as it escalates, and you end up inevitably attracting people who disagree with you or who just want to give you shit online, then it does ingress into your sort of your psyche, and you do have to make these choices. Like, am I doing this for the right reasons here? And I'm trying to find that balance myself at the moment between these different channels, because there's always something new to sort of like, oh, try this, try Instagram, try Discord, try this, try that.
I mean, it's catch-22 as well, because because I'm self-published, I'm doing the marketing as well. So I've got to give, kudos to these platforms that I wouldn't be here if they weren't there. Well, literally, because I wouldn't be able to market my book. But equally, I think that the value of social media is I've made some really valuable and enduring friendships, which I really cherish with people all around the world. And I think that's tantamount to the power of social media. If you use it, for that reason to sort of, not just market, but socialize. If you hit it off with somebody, there's potentially a great friendship there. That's what I found.
Yeah, just a sort of a side point, because do you think that with what sort of say you and I are doing in our own sort of like separate lanes, and the many others are doing it, I sometimes wonder, like, if there's what's the best approach here? Like, should we stay in our own kind of lanes doing our own things, or is there some sort of greater project that, for forces to be combined? And I don't get me wrong, I've not got anything in mind here at all, but sometimes I'm thinking like, it's a kind of classic. If we all pulled our finger out and we all combined, you'd make some sort of like psychedelic Voltron, which would just be able to sort of like, get the word out there. But then you end up with sort of, it's like being in a band where everyone's egos are clashing, and people. So it's a very sort of tricky one. And I struggle thinking like, does somebody need to lead the charge here? But then I realize I'm sort of far too opinionated in my own world, and it's a record. I just wonder if you had any thoughts around that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I see it as a slowly growing community, and I just can't see it stopping. But I've come across some individuals who become really enamored by the experience, as I did when I first started with it. It's like especially when you're young, it's like when I was 18 and taking LSD, you're like, why isn't the world up experiencing?
Put it in the water.
Yeah, well, why isn't everybody up experiencing? But I think really it's an unstoppable growth of a community. But really, if we start jumping up and down and saying, oh, you gotta try this, this is the future, it's gonna heal the world, I think if you start to come across as a little bit madcap and pushing it, that's really going to be off-putting. And my approach is, look, I want to be seen as, a responsible adult and a good husband and a good parent, because I think sort of portraying that puts those experiences and those substances in a really positive light. But I totally get other people who are a little bit more impatient and really want to push it. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. I think everybody's contributing to this growth of this community in their own individual ways. And if I was, if I was 18 and experienced this, I'd probably be impatient and really sort of pushing it. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think look, my two boys know what I do, because, they've wheedled it out of me as they've grown, and they're going to be proficient in knowing what the experience is. Obviously far too young to try it, but you can see it's kind of, it will spread. And I think ultimately you're going to end up with a position where it's reasonably widespread throughout culture and known about, and potentially still on the statute books as highly illegal. And I think at some point there just has to be a discussion, a grown-up discussion about it. And I think it will come. I just don't know when.
Yeah, I think what you described there about I think if we're going to put that in a nutshell, you are evangelizing through your own actions. So you yourself are sort of becoming an advertisement for this. So rather than having to say to people, try this, it's amazing, you can just sort of project the positive outcome, which is something I definitely try and do myself. And I've also got 2 young kids, so I'm in probably a similar situation to you, where the last thing I want to do is force my, lifestyle onto them or anything. But on the same, sometimes they go to the grandparents, and me and the wife, we go off to Peru, and they say, Daddy, where have you been? And we're very open with them. I say, we went and did this, and why did you do that? Well, because it helps, because because my childhood wasn't the best, and I needed a bit of help, so I reached out to a higher source. So we try and be as honest as we can without sort of putting them in a sort of a compromised position of, Daddy's absolutely wrecked off his tits today, so
Yeah. as I was on Saturday night, but I'm conscious. I'm kind of like, but I accept what you're saying, like it's sort of evangelizing through sort of attitude and approach. But again, as we said at the outset, I'm really sort of keen to promote the substance, the experience, and my interpretation. And although I've alluded to being terrified, of commitment to the substance and 5-MeO, I think I've got to say that I've got to tell the truth. The experiences are phenomenal. I have had, like when you're a kid and you're playing with your friends and it's just brilliant, and it's like you're just so happy to be alive. I mean, the DMT experiences largely for me have been like that, but for a grown-up, and seeing things that are just beyond your imagination and coming out of experiences of experienced profound ecstasy. I mean, far more than MDMA. I mean, really archaic ecstasy and laughter like I never knew existed, and feeling, being in an experience that you could literally, if the chance was there to spend all day there, you would spend all day there just cooing over what you see. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I'm conscious that we have said, commitment is terrifying. And while that's true, the experiences are, in my experience, by and large, phenomenally entertaining.
Yeah, you definitely don't need to explain it to me, mate, because I understand that kind of that balance between the existential dread of trying to get your ego to go through this experience, but the absolutely sound knowledge that you want to do this, and you want to do it because of how amazing the experience is. And I think I like when you mentioned sort of childhood there, because the thing that kind of jumps out to me, I mean, certainly there's a euphoria, but it's awe and wonder, and the kind of awe and wonder that you like I say, you've not had since childhood.
Yeah.
And that's the thing which I think is so medicinal, even, about something like DMT, which isn't typically classed as like a medicine the same way ayahuasca is, but it is, in that it can, when our lives are like what you described, doing the night shift, then sometimes you just need that sort of like holy shit, it just feels so good to be reminded of how good life can be, and how just the joy of being a human being and the joy of existing. That is medicine. That is in itself. And why that then conjures up these feelings of absolute existential dread
isn't it a paradox?
It is. It's insane.
I love that paradox.
And as soon as you come around 10 minutes later, you'll be saying to yourself, like, what was my problem? That was just amazing. Like, what was? But yeah, the hour leading up to that, I find is hellish.
I've said before, it's like walking to your own funeral. and you know what? It's like, how many times have I done this? I've smoked DMT. It's been phenomenal, and I've come out of the experience, and I'm saying to my wife, that stuff is amazing, and I'll say, I should be smoking that stuff all the time. I mean, I should be smoking it all the time. Nothing's stopping me. And yet it's been weeks since I've touched it again. And I know next time I smoke it, I'll probably be saying, I should be smoking it all the time. But no, because it's like walking to your own funeral before you actually get there.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you've got to, I think the true benefit of the experience comes from this kind of integration, comes from putting it together. So if you don't come back to reality, well, then how are you going to use? There's nowhere to use those lessons. You've got to sort of, there's no kind of like place where you can sort of reflect and really like feel the awe and the wonder it just described. You kind of need your monkey body to feel like, because at the moment that you're in it, it's so transcendent and slippery, and you think you're going to remember it forever, and it just slips away from you. But then you sort of, I find I appreciate it more as I'm sat there on the edge of my couch or whatever, thinking, what? That's just incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely agree, Rob. Well said. Yeah, absolutely.
So I've just got a couple more sort of quick questions for you, mate. As you've been sort of going through this process, do you find that you've been able to control the sort of the process more, or is it always a sort of like a lucky dip for you?
So for me, it's always been a lucky dip, but I mentioned earlier about individuals who have got far more experience than me, and some of them are absolutely adamant that you can control these experiences and determine the content of the experiences in terms of visions. I'm not ruling that out. I mean, it's been clear to me that sometimes the experiences have incorporated into the visions aspects of my life, my real life. But for me, it's kind of been a lucky dip, and I have wondered whether, you know, it's one particular entity or a group of entities that are routinely interacting with me, and kind of know that I've set out on research and authorship, and have kind of given me a real mixed bag of experiences. I would say I've certainly found they've changed over time, and that leads me to suspect that there's a very, for me, a slow initiatory aspect to the experiences. They certainly changed over time. Just to outline that, you know, began very visual, and then became invasive, and then became ultimately more revelatory. I don't mean in terms of anything like prophecy, far from it, but in terms of seeing these entities in otherwise consensus reality as huge, sort of looking like a ultimately transparent but very large multifaceted gemstone, very large relative to my physical size, and observing those, you know, in my expanded bubble of psycho-spiritual outpouring, and just seeing what I would say is subjective evidence of other life forms. I mean, they, for me, were the best of my experiences by far, seeing those and feeling it exuding tremendous power, you know, and realizing those are the beings, the entities that will impose upon the DMT user and fill them in put them in a world of wonder and visions. It's the same entity that will invest a portion of itself within you and act in a sort of quasi-physical manner, whether it's massaging your brain or sealing up your lips and your nostrils or rooting around in your abdomen or doing all kinds of untold wonders.
Have you ever, do you go into the experiences with like a certain intention or anything, or are you always kind of like completely open to just what occurs?
I'd say completely open. When I first started, and you know, you experience its power, I was praying to each and every god under the sun, whatever would give me the sort of metal to put myself there and deliver me safely back. And then I realized that, you know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I realized it's ultimately my willpower that was making me commit. So I just began to focus on that, and the strategy was not to think about it too much. If I start to think about, you know, I've got this pipe and I'm going to smoke it, but this happened last time and that happened last week, I'm probably never going to smoke it. And I'll be honest, that's happened a couple of times, but it was by and large, once I'd sat down and once I'd laid down, to me, that signaled my commitment to the experience. And then I realized, just sit up and get on with it.
Yeah. So last one, mate, is do you identify with any particular occult traditions like Thelema or Kabbalah or anything like that?
Love that question. I mean, as a theosophist, well, no, let me revise that. As someone who really appreciates theosophy, I kind of buy into all those traditions. I buy into what Crowley's doing, even though I don't practice it, and even though I'm not a big fan, I'm not drawn to his work. I recognize his standing in the occult world. Kabbalah, all of them. I mean, you know, sometimes you do these equal opportunities forms at work or wherever, and they're like, you have to choose a religion. And I wish there was a box that would say like all of them, because I would tick that. So I kind of like, you know, for me, esotericism and occultism, it's kind of looking comparatively at science, philosophy, and religions, and that's what I like about it.
Do you do any sort of practice yourself?
Do you know what? That's a great question, and I've always thought that I don't. But do you know what? I've realised that I do, and it's just a mantra that I have going over and over in my head. I'm not going to share it. It's personal, but yeah, and I suppose that mantra and what it means to me and what my intention is when I put it out there mentally, I guess that is a magical practice. I mean, I'm reading books at the moment by Franz Baden. I've never heard of him before, and I think he's considered the greatest adept of the 20th century. Certainly, I mean, the late Franz Baden. He was a Czechoslovakian adept. Hitler tried to sign him up, for his war effort as a sort of, practicing occultist, and the guy refused and was put in prison, a prison camp, until I think Russian soldiers freed him. And his books are phenomenal. I mean, very, very plainly written. And I think if you're going to pursue that path of theurgy, it's potentially very. It's a commitment. You don't take any half measures. I think like DMT, it's life changing, but whereas DMT is like very quick and instant, this is a process like meditation. You're committing to a lifestyle. But no, I'm not. I don't have any stars of David under any rugs, or But I do buy into those practices. I think I think at the moment there's a huge disconnect between theurgy, people who practice magic without substances, and I think there's a big disconnect between ufologists, because I think there are shared commonalities between all, and these are themes that I'm going to try and delve into in a future literary project.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Matt. I think the attraction between something, say, like ufology or ancient civilizations or magic, is it is this kind of thinning of the veil in some way, whether it's a thinning of veil to something ancestral, or something like a higher power, something religious, or something extra dimensional. I think that craving, the thing which gets its kind of hook into all of us probably at some point, where it's like, it even comes across in, I think, in our media, there's a reason why Jedis are cool, and it's because of the mystical element, or why when you see Neo in the Matrix, it's the mystical bit is what makes that so sort of just so awesome and sort of identifiable. So I think that calling is in us all somewhere, and it just gets projected in sort of different shapes or forms. But I've sort of realized, similar to yourself, that I probably put more stock in ritual than what I thought I did. And even as something as simple as looking into a fire or watching a sunset or something like that, it means something, and it is a ritual. You sit there and you watch a sunset, and and it just calls out some sort of commonality with through the years, that at some point your most primitive tribal ancestors would have been sat there watching a sunset just as you are now, and there's these links across time. So I've sort of started to recognize a lot of that kind of stuff myself. So it's something I'm sort of investigating a little bit. I'm not exactly got a huge map of what I believe or don't believe in that regards, but it's all interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think well said. I really enjoy and appreciate how you describe that. Yeah, it's absolutely valid.
Well, I've got to say that I've absolutely loved this conversation. I appreciate it's absolutely flown by, and we didn't even really particularly get into swapping stories, so we're going to have to do this again, mate, at some point and dive into it. Just before we sort of sign off, is there any sort of is there anything you want to sort of say about where people can find you or where you live online?
Yeah, it's usually DMT researcher. So I think Twitter, where I seem to be most active at the moment, is, I think it's DMT _ researcher. I think Instagram is just DMT researcher, and Facebook is DMT.researcher. I pride myself on always responding to DMs, PMs, messages. If you're asking to buy DMT, it's just going to be a flat no. I always recommend DIY extraction. You know, I'm not here to provide you with that substance. I've always extracted my own. I'm taking that risk myself. It'd be great if you want to take a look at my books. I'd absolutely love that. This is DMT and My Occult Mind Light. That's a revised version of what was a much larger original that's since been retired, because I thought it was too wordy. I really like this version. And this is the follow-up, and I've been pretty lazy marketing it. It came out, I think it was last year, and I for one reason or another, I've not really marketed it as well as I should. But it seems to be picking up, and people seem to like it. So if you do take a look, be great. I'd love to hear from you if you do, and if you really enjoy it and want to leave a positive review, then much love and blessings. That would be absolutely fantastic, and I'd really appreciate that.
Well, I'll put some links in the description below to your various social media channels, and I can definitely attest to that your books are very entertaining. I'm roughly about halfway through your second one now, and I think the second one I found. I think it's because I had the original version, the wordier version of the first one. So yeah, I would say probably jump in at the second one. I think your writing style is really sort of coming to its own in that one.
Yeah, I'd agree. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that.
Oh, mate. Well, like I say, mate, this has been a great conversation. If you're up for it, let's talk some more sometime. I'd love to hear more.
We'll do it again sometime.
It's awesome. Right, mate. Well, let's sign off there. Thanks a lot for your time, and let's catch up some point in the future.
Cheers, Rob. Thank you. Good night.
Cheers, dude. Ciao, mate.